it's Leela, the proud poly kinky queer slut. Today's question is, are you racist? And I want to say that yes, I have done things that are racist in my life. I think that talking about racism in the context of acknowledging our biases and that we have made mistakes is very important. And in the 12-step programs, how they talk about the first thing that you need to do is acknowledge that you have a problem. Well, I think this becomes a major block because no one wants to be labeled as something bad, something that is perceived as evil in our society. Nobody wants to be called racist. And that stops us from looking at the things that we do that are influenced by our racial biases and by our unconscious biases, by the things that we were taught when we were kids. By the things that we're taught by our culture now as adults as well. So, I grew up in one of the whitest parts of the country. I grew up in a town where there was literally one person of color. I was taught messages about fear of people who were different from me that were internalized into me. And as much as I find myself trying to actively fight that, as much as I read books about being anti-racist, as much as I try to teach my children about the history of racial oppression, as much as I really do make an effort in my life, I know that I still mess it up. I still mess it up. Like even on these podcasts, I talk about, all of this oppression out there. And I tend to not talk about the big glaring one of racism or mention it in passing because my experience is with other kinds of discrimination. But just the fact that I can say that means that I'm ignoring my racial privilege in some ways. And I try not to do that. I try to look at my racial privilege. I want to talk about the concept of racism as a word. I know that's a highly charged word for a lot of people. And it's because it's got, racism is horrible. Being a person who commits racist acts is something that, we tend to equate to people who, string people up, who conduct violence as a part of their bias. But I do think there's a nuanced conversation we need to have here, and it starts with acknowledging that we all do things, and especially I'm talking to you, my fellow white people. We do things because of the biases that are in us, whether we mean to or not. And I think that's very, very important to stop and to look at and to listen. It's very, very important, I think, that we stop talking a little bit and listen. I know I do it a friggin' podcast. Like, I can't stop talking. But take a moment to actually pay attention to the voices of people who are different from you. It is not the job of a person of color to educate white people about racism. But when somebody does step up and say, here are my thoughts, here are my opinions, the books that have been written, oh my God, so many books. It's on us to actually pay attention and then teach each other and then be the person who speaks up. Say something. When you see somebody doing something or saying something that is racist, say something about it, confront it, and fight that harm. That's what I try to do. That's how I try to live. But yeah, I think it all starts with acknowledging that yes, I am benefiting from racist policies, from systemic racist policies. I am benefiting from people perceiving me based on the color of my skin in ways that are favorable. And some of those people are people who would see people of color and view them less favorably. That is a reality of my life and the times in which I live. And so I need to take that responsibility to acknowledge that and to make sure that I am aware of my bias and thinking about it and just being mindful of it, just being mindful of it so that in a moment, if a question pops into my head where I'm like, oh, I'm feeling some fear here. Why am I feeling some fear here? What's causing this? What's generating this fear? Is it that person across the street? Am I more afraid of that person because that person has dark skin? Oh, okay. Maybe I am a little bit. All right, stop and reevaluate that situation. Is this actually a situation where I have any reason to be afraid? And, in my experience, I found that if I do that, I find that most of the time I don't have reason to be afraid. It's important work. It's important work. And as a parent, I also really try to make my kids both aware of history and aware of current biases and of their privilege, but also to expose them to people who are different from them, who look different from them, who have different cultures from them, who act differently from them because of those cultures and those backgrounds, to really give them the sense that all people are people and make sure that they don't have that experience I did of growing up just not knowing. Um, because I do think that that's important. They will have less unconscious bias than I have. And that's how we move the needle. That's how we push this forward. Final thought on this: people do not get a pass on being racist because they are old. They just do not. And I will talk more about this in a different episode, I'm sure. But also we need to acknowledge that in our culture of white culture in America, we go to great lengths to keep the peace and to not challenge people and to respect our elders. And that means we let them get away with saying all sorts of stuff unchallenged that we really just shouldn't. And I like to just step up and say something when I hear something. Um, Frankly, it doesn't matter who's saying it, and you're not going to change their mind. But it's really powerful when there's just somebody else who, in the group, when the other people in the group can just see somebody saying, you know what, I disagree with that. As a matter of fact, I think that is coming from a place of bias. You don't have to use the word racist, but coming from a place of bias. And, that's something we all need to talk about and think about and just raise the idea. Get the idea out there. Ideas are powerful. But yeah, so in answer to your question, yes, I am sometimes racist, and it is something that I fight against every day of my life. But I know that it is always going to be a battle. Just like, once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. Well, yeah, this is a symptom in our society and something that I've inherited from my culture that I need to actively change. And I work on it all the time, but that's the best I can do. And yeah, so thank you very much for the question. This is Leela, the proud poly kinky queer slut. Ask me anything and have a great day.